Ismaels Orangen is about a little boy, Salim, who is 8 years old in Jaffa, and his family own an orange farm that they have had for generations, that they lose when the tanks roll into Jaffa and Jewish forces take over the city. And he must flee, and eventually his journey takes him to London, where he unexpectedly meets a Jewish woman with whom he falls deeply in love and decides to marry. And they must choose then in their lives between building a new family and making a new start and a lifelong passion for revenge and return. It's based on the story of my family and my parents and the decision they made when they met to marry and start a family of their own, despite coming from two peoples who viewed each other as bitter enemies. My mother's family is survivors of all of the traumas that have afflicted the Jews in the 20th century and even before, the pogroms in Russia, the Holocaust of the Second World War. They were survivors. They fled from Europe to England, and she was born there. My father's family, they lost their home after 1948, the Nakba, the disaster that afflicted the Palestinians. And they also fled an immigrant family to England, where my father met and married my mother. I often ask myself, why? Why did my mother and father marry? It's not easy to be brave enough to make this choice. And I think love is one answer, but I don't think it's the only answer. I think there is something in us as people, in the modern age now as much as anything else, that really strives to look beyond the boxes that we are born into and try to forge lives that are our own, that are self-created and self-driven. And inside my mother and father was this desire, and I think that they recognized it in each other. The first time that I understood, really understood, what it was that made my family different, I was very young. I was only maybe 4 or 5 years old. And I remember so clearly, like it was yesterday, that I was in the car with my mother. And my Jewish grandmother was coming to visit us. Her name is Ethel Shapiro. It's a very Jewish name. And my mother was trying to warn me not to tell anybody, because we were in Kuwait at the time. It's an Arab country. They weren't welcoming to the Jews, but more, we had family and friends there. My mother did not want them to know that she was Jewish and therefore that her mother was Jewish. So she said to me, "Don't tell anybody your grandmother's name." And I said, "Well, why?" And she tried to explain in very simple words that Mummy and Daddy come from two different families and they can't agree on who should live in this country called Israel. And they are fighting, and they have been fighting for a long time. And they're not happy with each other, and so you mustn't tell. And I thought about it, and I asked her the only question, and it was the first thing that came into my mind. I asked her, "Okay, but when will they stop fighting?" And I remember she paused, and I remember the shape of the back of her head as she drove, and she didn't answer me for a little bit. And then she said, "Soon, they will stop soon." And it took me years to understand that she had lied to protect me. I was waiting all those years for them to stop soon. And my experience of growing up with these two families, even though there were many things about them that were very, very different. I mean, they spoke a different language and they ate different foods, but also there were things about them that were incredibly similar. You know, they were two big immigrant clans. They lived together, they saw each other all the time, each family. They were extremely close. And even though it was so different, it was also strangely similar. And one of the things that I found the most moving about releasing the book, actually, and I sent it to my family and they read it. And I was so nervous, as you can imagine, how nervous I felt when they read it. One of my cousins wrote to me, and she said, very sweetly, I thought, "Do you know, in all these years that I grew up with you, I never knew you had another family. I never realized, because they just didn't know." I have many things that remind me of my different families. For example, this is one, and the chain was something that I saw around my mother's neck, my grandmother Ethel, all of her life, and when she died it came to me. And the charm was something that my Arabic Palestinian grandmother, my Tata, gave to me, a hand of Fatima for protection. And she also died, and after their deaths I wear them joined so that I can remember both of them and where they came from. The great irony of the war that afflicts these two beleaguered peoples is that there is so much more that unites them than divides them. They have been driven by the same sense of fear and the same sense of loss. They have been desperate to find and make a place that they can belong, to somehow right the wrongs of the past with the decisions they make in the future. Arabs and Jews are not condemned to be enemies. Nobody is condemned to be to fight endlessly. And wars end. I hold on to this belief. I believe that there are many people who want to start to build those bridges and not rely on the politicians to do it alone. And I hope that for me, my contribution was to write this book from my perspective, to be one brick in that bridge, at least, so that one day there are more people who can walk across. Well, when I think of oranges, as many people in the Mediterranean would, they are the sustenance of a people. They're the symbol of Jaffa, and they're also the symbol of the Mediterranean. And they fruit in the spring. And everywhere you go, you see these beautiful trees bursting into huge orange globes. And they really are, for us, the promise of the year and the celebration of life.